We turn to someone now who has a vote in all of this, U.S. Senator Chris Coons, a Democrat of Delaware. Thank you for stepping off the Senate floor on your long day and jumping on television with us, sir.
Thank you for covering this. It's been a long and a challenging day. I've dedicated the last few hours to both listening to the arguments about the different motions to try and amend the rules that Majority Leader McConnell is trying to ram through, and at times reading back through the briefs of both sides and the record of the hearings in front of the House Intelligence Committee. For folks who may not have had hours to dedicate to this, it really is galling to really square on look at the rules that Majority Leader McConnell is trying to get adopted by the end of tonight. It really will produce a backwards process where the House managers will be presenting a case without the benefit of the additional evidence and witnesses that would allow us to really get to the truth. It raises the question whether my colleagues in the Republican Party want a fair trial or not.
Senator, you are one of the individuals we've watched seated here all day. You obviously are very close to it. Do you have a view or a conclusion on what happened, on why Mitch McConnell, who has famously whipped many votes, had to change this? Do you view that as a genuine change, or is there something else afoot?
You mean the last-minute hand-scratched revisions from 2 to 3 days and a slight tweak to the evidentiary process? All I've heard is that this was the result of a few Republicans pressing him because when we came into session, he seemed determined to bull ahead, giving the House managers just 2 days to make their entire case. And I think they were clear that that meant we would be here from 1 p.m. to 1 a.m. at least. And a number of my colleagues, I think, felt that that was overdoing it. As it is, I think the Republican majority is still going to try and tear through this case in less than 10 days from beginning to end.
That's quite striking. Senator, I have another question for you, and then our analyst and your former colleague, Senator McCaskill, is going to jump in if that's all right with you. My question now goes to what's happening. There's been all of this wrangling over documents. There have been party line votes. Now there is this urgent request to use the powers of the Senate to subpoena, to force the testimony of Mick Mulvaney. Why are you and your Democratic colleagues leading with him tonight? And do you think you can pick up any support for this vote?
I hope we can, but the vote so far today suggests that Mitch McConnell continues his iron grip on the Republican majority and their caucus. Mick Mulvaney would be the most relevant witness to the question, what was President Trump thinking? Why did he put a hold on vitally needed military assistance to Ukraine? As the acting chief of staff and the former OMB director, Mulvaney was in the room for the conversations, was on the email chains. I'll remind you, he famously came out and in a press conference blurted out, there's going to be political influence in foreign policy, get over it, when pressed about whether there was a quid pro quo. As I have been going back through the record of the House Intelligence Committee hearings, it is really striking just how many senior members of the administration, folks from the National Security Council, ambassadors, the ambassador to Ukraine, the ambassador to the EU, stepped forward despite opposition from the White House, despite President Trump's repeated efforts to block their testimony, and gave very clear evidence that there was a second whole foreign policy afoot that was being run by the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. We heard snippets of that, different pieces of recorded testimony, different texts and emails in the course of the arguments about the motions that are being made by Minority Leader Schumer to try and amend Majority Leader McConnell's rules here. And so I went back and dug through all of it. I think the reason we're going after Mick Mulvaney as the first witness we're seeking is that his testimony would be most directly relevant. And if he testified truthfully in front of the Senate, I think it would be really important to making a decision here on the most important article of impeachment, which is alleging that President Trump abused the power of his office for personal gain.
Chris, let's be optimistic here and assume that when the time comes next Wednesday that everyone votes on whether to allow any witnesses or any documents, that there are 4 Republicans that vote with the Democrats for that concept. What procedurally do you think will happen then? Will there be a negotiation between Schumer and McConnell, or will you start seeing individual votes teed up for a Bolton, for a Mulvaney, for OMB docs? How do you think that will play out if the 4 votes actually surface at that critical moment?
Oh, well, Claire, that's something we're going to be talking about in the course of this week. The rules, as I understand it, having just read over it earlier today, that Majority Leader McConnell is trying to get through tonight, would require that there be a deposition first before anyone appears on the Senate floor. And that would slow up the process for at least another week, I would believe, if we came to some agreement. As you know well, during the impeachment trial of President Bill Clinton, after a fair amount of back and forth and negotiation, ultimately the rules were adopted 100-0 on a bipartisan basis. That's not what's happening here. Majority Leader McConnell did not share a draft of these rules with any Senate Democrat, not with Senator Schumer or anyone else, until we got to the floor today. And he is not seeming to be in the mood to consult or try and reach any sort of a bipartisan compromise. So my hunch is that we will get exactly the result that 4 Republican senators insist on, and that they will be the only bulwark between us and a sham trial that really has no evidence and no witnesses presented to the Senate.
And Senator, just briefly, we have about 30 seconds, and I know you have to go back to the floor. But from what we've been watching, what has it been like in there? Has everyone been studious? Has everyone been paying attention? Just give us a little sense of what you've been. It's a historic day.
It's a very somber mood. It's been a very heavy day. I will tell you that I think Adam Schiff, the congressman from California who leads the House Managers, has been very compelling in his statements, in his testimony. There's a number of other members of the House, Zoe Lofgren, Val Demings, Jason Crow from Colorado, who've also, I think, done a very strong job of making their presentations. I found President Trump's defense team more suited perhaps for a cable TV presentation than for the sort of seriousness of the Senate, but that may be my response to the bombastic tone they took.
Senator, you're hurting my feelings.